Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Speaker, after 8 years, this tired NDP Liberal government has become increasingly desperate. The Prime Minister has come to resemble one of those wacky, waving, inflatable tube guys outside car dealerships. His hands flail about as the political winds push him around randomly. Year after year, this Prime Minister has claimed that if he didn't punish low-income Canadians with higher energy prices, it would lead to the extinction of human race. In reality, his regressive carbon tax has become a meteor headed for the Liberal Party. That is the only reasonable explanation Canadians can take away from the decision to cut the carbon tax on home heating. The Prime Minister only cares about the survival of the Liberal Party. Canadians can see through Liberal talking points and simplistic slogans. Canadians know the Prime Minister is being inauthentic when he talks about affordability. Even the Liberals know it. Why else would the former Parliamentary Secretary provide fake numbers to this House about the cost of the Prime Minister's third family vacation in a year? What's even more remarkable is that the Liberals knew what the impact of bringing in the carbon tax and carbon tax, too, would mean for Canadians struggling to put food on the table. They knew it, and they did it anyhow. These Liberal ministers knew it would hurt Atlantic Canadians. They spelled it out in black and white, and I know because I quoted it back to them. Here's what I said during an adjournment debate. And this was 1 year ago, quote, "The Liberals' new fuel standards regulations clearly state that the cost will be borne disproportionately by rural Atlantic Canadians, yet the Liberals claim that nobody uses home heating oil anymore," unquote. The Liberals were clearly gaslighting Atlantic Canadians, then charging them a carbon tax on that same gas. Before any of the Liberals get up to spread more misinformation, I challenge them to read their own regulatory analysis. This is not the Conservatives saying it, and it's not the Parliamentary Budget Officer. These are the Liberals' own words. It said, quote, "It's estimated that provinces in Atlantic Canada would be more negatively affected by the proposed regulations. This is largely because the Atlantic provinces use more light fuel oil for home heating than other provinces." It later said, "This may be the most acute for seniors living in the Atlantic provinces, where they account for a higher share of the total population compared to other Canadian provinces, and are also more likely to experience some of the highest energy expenditures in Canada proportional to income," end quote. The NDP Liberal government knew the second carbon tax would hammer Atlantic Canada. The radical socialist environment minister knew his policy would hurt seniors on fixed incomes. He knew his policy would hurt lower income Canadians. He knew it, and he did it anyway. And what did he do when the price of energy shot up in Atlantic Canada this summer? The radical minister of the environment claimed this was all the fault of the companies and not his carbon tax and clean fuel regulations. It's another example of Liberal gaslighting, except this time it was the Liberal caucus who were taken for a ride. The environment minister has known for years that his energy regulations would hammer Atlantic Canadians. He knew costs would be passed on to consumers. He knew it, and he pushed it through anyhow. This socialist environment minister has devoted his entire life to putting his radical vision for the environment ahead of people. At least he's honest about it. What excuse does the Liberal caucus and its parliamentary secretary have for adopting this regressive policy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't even know where to start with the only MP who have voted against the Paris Agreement, Madam Speaker. She's always got more climate denial and conspiracy theories than I can handle in this House. I'd remind the members opposite that they all ran on a similar plan in 2021 to price carbon. And in fact, the Tories reprimanded that member of the Conservative caucus over her comments on climate change. The Conservative Party told the media that member was told to take down videos from her YouTube channel that were spouting those conspiracy theories. And
an opportunity to draft her question. She's going to have another opportunity to respond. I would ask her to wait until then. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The member continues to yell that it's a big conspiracy and a censorship to tell her to take those videos down. I didn't tell her to take those videos down. The Conservative Party told her to take her videos down because they were full of nonsense, disinformation, and conspiracy theories about climate lockdowns, about governments who are going to put in place certain restrictions like those imposed by COVID-19, Madam Speaker. It's like that member gets all of their news from the National Enquirer and brings them into this House to spread misinformation and disinformation throughout her riding. It's extremely disappointing, Madam Speaker, and it's not the first time that we've heard blatant climate denial from that member. And I hope for the sake of her caucus that they, can ask her, as they did in 2021, when they all ran on a plan to price carbon, that maybe she should tone down the rhetoric on the conspiracy theories and the climate denial a little bit, because as the member from Wellington-Halton Hills has stated, no party without a viable climate plan to reduce emissions is ever going to get elected, and I couldn't agree more. But like the member opposite, a lot of my community members use home heating oil in order to heat their homes, and it's akin to using coal. These are products that were used in the 1800s to heat homes, and we can do a lot better in 2023. So rural Ontarians will hopefully get a deal from Premier Ford whereby we can help subsidize their home heating through a heat pump, which is an efficient way to heat one's home. It's an effective way to heat one's home, and it drastically reduces emissions. And, as the members opposite continue to yell at me that they don't work in the cold, it's not true. It gets cold where I live, and I use a heat pump, and it works just fine. And there's also cold-adjusted ones that use a mix of various technologies, which is, I would say, the only word that the Conservatives have used to describe their climate policy. They're just going to use technology to drive down all emissions, and they're going to meet some kind of fictitious target with technology, like things that we've invested in, like carbon capture, use, and storage, Madam Speaker. They don't have a plan to fight climate change. They've got absolutely no leadership in that party. They've stopped talking about climate change altogether, and it's really, really disappointing. Now, on to affordability, Madam Speaker. The vast majority of those who live in provinces like Ontario, where the member and I are both from, who go about their lives, they pay the price on pollution, and they also receive a rebate. And I'd encourage anybody who's curious about that rebate to check their bank statement from October the 13th. They'll see one of their 4 quarterly statements, up to $244 for a family of 4 in that quarterly statement, which is $947, I think, if my math is correct. It's probably not, $946, which is the part of the rebate program, which the Conservatives will never talk about because they don't want to accept that our program, which is a consumer-based revenue-neutral program, is better than theirs. Because if you recall from the 2021 election platform, they had some sort of a Zeller's style catalog that you could choose something from. You could choose a bike or maybe something else, another green product. Well, that wouldn't work, and that's why they didn't win that election. And as the member from Wellington Hall,
Member for Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
No, none of my YouTubes are taken down. More misinformation from the Liberals. After 8 years, Canadians know the truth. The higher prices are the official government policy for this NDP Liberal government. The goal of the carbon tax is to make energy unaffordable. The Environment Minister says they have to make energy more expensive so they can reach their net zero by 2050. It's the same minister who says we need a mandatory target of cutting 30% of nitrogen emissions from fertilizer by 2030. It's the same minister who worked with the communists to control China by setting our land grab target of 30% by 2030. It's the same minister who set an electric vehicle sales target of 30% by 2030. He wants energy to be more expensive. He wants food to be more expensive. He wants land to be more expensive. He wants cars to be more expensive. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister who appointed this Liberal minister is just not worth the cost.